Hello and welcome to another episode of Ideas for the Workplace. My guest today is Jeff St. Denis, and we'll talk about what it means to be an entrepreneur. Jeff is the CEO and founder of Culture Catalyst. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, hey, thanks, Hedieh. Great to be here.
So let's start by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about your career journey.
Sure. Yeah. Culture Catalyst is one of those pandemic stories. So it's like a pandemic startup. I started it in 2020. At the same time, we were under lockdown when I was living in Toronto. And I thought, we have a pandemic. Why not start an MBA? So I was starting my business, doing my MBA all virtually from my little nook in our condo where me and my husband lived in Etobicoke. So that's how Culture Catalyst kind of was incorporated. But the history of Culture Catalyst actually goes back, and it's kind of one of the reasons why I got into entrepreneurship. So you can kind of bucket my career in kind of three areas. One is, cutting my teeth in the hotel business. That's where I started. Then I got into corporate in Toronto eventually. And then now I have here my own business. But way back, and I was counting the years before we're meeting today, 25 years ago, the year 2000,
Wow.
I think I see that as being the start of my professional career. That's when I was in hospitality management school and I got my first job at a big hotel brand in Vancouver. That's where I'm from. I was at the University of British Columbia and working in a hotel part-time in graveyards at the same time as going to school. And I just fell in love with the industry. So I actually left UBC and I started, I found a school that offered hospitality management. So I actually changed my education to suit my career. And that career took me around all the different hotels in Vancouver. And then eventually I joined Fairmont Hotels and that brought me to Ontario. So I had a chance to work at the property here in Ottawa. And then eventually I'm going to the head office in Toronto 11 years ago, leaving the field and going to corporate. And I was really lucky to be part of a really great team putting out some great programs around the world. So the global head office for Fairmont, it was Toronto, and I was on the global learning and development team. And there's a lot of changes happening in the company, and a lot of the programs we're working on was to help facilitate those changes. So it was a really exciting time. However, it was pretty short-lived. It was 2 years until Fairmont, as it was, purchased by another company, so Accor Hotels. So it's now one of the brands under the Accor umbrella. And that made a lot of us redundant. So my first step into entrepreneurship was actually forced on me. I don't know if I would have chosen it for myself at the time, but we were given pretty nice packages, I would say. Yeah, they gave us a retention letter to say, please stay with us as we go through this transition. And if you stay, this is your exit package if you do. And they were pretty generous. So we saw no reason to leave, or some did. And it was with that freedom, I was able to start consulting. So a colleague of mine who also was made redundant through that merger and acquisition, she went back to her family's organic company and she wanted to professionalize the HR function. They didn't have any HR there and it was in the GTA. And so she was my first client and put in some of the nuts and bolts HR stuff like health and safety, job description, recruitment, etc., policies, handbook, all that stuff. So that was my first gig. And then I ended up doing other gigs, over the year or two. And then a client actually ended up hiring me. It was a small communications agency. So worked back with corporate clients again, large corporate clients, and doing their communications strategy and assets and what have you. And then I got hired on to one of the big four. I had a friend who worked there, got hired on. That was very short-lived. It wasn't a good fit. And then I just thought, you know what? I think at this point, I think I know what I need to do. I think I know what I love to do. And I actually have a brand name that I actually made up when I was doing all that outplacement service when we were let go from Fairmont. So we got part of the package was getting outplacement services, which is basically, helping you find your next gig, right? They offer workshops and coaching, what have you, resume, job search, that kind of thing. And it was one of the personal branding workshops that I attended that kind of helped you kind of refine what you're known for. And throughout my career, when I worked at Fairmont, I might have different titles in HR or learning and development, but what I did was I helped spark, positive changes in workplace cultures. So that's where Culture Catalyst was born, sparking that positive change in workplaces. So in 2020, I thought, hey, why not? Let's make this formal. Got the logo, the branding, started doing contract work for clients and then doing my own project work. And here we are today. So right now we focus on helping small, medium organizations with diversity and inclusion, talent management, recruitment, advisory, and training, a lot of training. So that's where we are today.
Wonderful. So, like a very broad career. And it's interesting. I mean, I was going to ask that would be my next question of why did you decide to become an entrepreneur? But you kind of answered that it just came to you. It wasn't planned. And I guess everything happens for a reason, right? That layoff led you to where you are essentially. Before we move on to my next question, you mentioned Culture Catalyst does training. So can you expand on that? Like what kind of training?
Yeah. What kind of training? Yeah, a lot around the diversity and inclusion umbrella. So my sweet spot with Culture Catalyst is helping like medium-sized companies who don't have their own diversity inclusion professional in-house. So I kind of, help their L&D team or their HR team with diversity and inclusion strategy, as well as a lot of training. So a lot of, when you're trying to make a culture change on trying to make it more inclusive and productive, that requires a lot of content to be brought in to an organization. So it can be everything from the fundamentals of inclusive workplaces, is like the table stakes things like unconscious bias, cultural awareness, and how to prevent microaggressions, diversity, discrimination, and harassment prevention. So there's lots of kind of content that workplaces maybe typically haven't had before that they need to have their employees go through. So I have, clients where, we do customized workshops based on the company's values and what they want to achieve. And right now there's lots of different semantic changes around the DEI profession. So some, even though it's DEI work, we're calling it, just inclusion or improved collaboration. Like it's, we're titling it with different things, but, under that title, it's the same kind of work going on. How can you remove systemic barriers in your organization? Can you overcome bias? How can you hire better? How can you retain your diverse staff better? So it's a lot along those veins. So there's always like an inclusion aspect to it. Even customer service, like inclusive customer service, if establishment has a lot of diverse customers, trying to equip their staff on how to best serve them. So yeah, a lot of content, a lot of training. I have a lot of content that I've developed over the years that are kind of off my shelf, but I always try to customize it for that client's unique context, values, and what they want to achieve.
And I really like that idea of inclusive customer service as well, because not many organizations think of that. Mostly when they think of it is about, promoting equity and inclusion in their own workspace, but that piece is often overlooked. So it's great that you offer that as well. And another question about Culture Catalyst. You mentioned training, but let's say an organization is brand new and just wants to have a more inclusive workspace. Do you also help them develop a strategy?
Yeah, whether they're just getting started or they've been established for a long time, you can bake DEI into how you grow, coming, right with your first kind of policy, kind of outlining the business case for it. There's lots of different perspectives as it comes to D&I work. One is, to improve organizational effectiveness. One is to be compliant with the law. Another one is it's just people feel like it's like just the right thing, right? So, in that early stage, you want to define what it means for you. Do you eventually want to become like a B corporation or a benefits corporation? Does ESG or, environmental sustainability and governance, is that an important aspect? Just not thinking about the profit you're going to make, but also, the impact that you're going to make on your community, society, and the environment. So it makes a founder kind of think of all these things, and it might not be until they start hiring the first people that it really kind of comes into realization, or maybe it's about the clients that they choose to serve. That's how that kind of grounding kind of helps them go forward in their business. So yeah, so right from a startup to an established organization that's been around for decades. We've helped organizations figure out what D&I means to them, and how it can help them achieve their organizational goals.
Perfect. So it's great that you offer that service of like developing that strategy as well, in addition to training. So I know we talked about like your decision and how you became an entrepreneur. Can you tell us a little bit about the entrepreneurial mindset? What does it mean?
Yeah. I'm sure there's a different definition for everyone, but I think really what it is trying to solve problems, inventing solutions to solve problems for other people. There is an element of financial risk as well that comes with it, right? When you get off the safety, so to speak, of like a corporate salary or an organizational salary, there is a financial risk associated with entrepreneurship. The things that you create might not land, customers may not be buying for some reason. But really it's just using your own creativity to help solve problems for others, I think. And there is like a wealth building aspect to it as well that kind of appeals to people. So, if you're in a corporate role, there usually is a ceiling of, how much you could make in terms of your income. But, the promise of entrepreneurship is that, you'll be able to, hopefully, be successful financially as well in going through an endeavor. Now, what that means to you could be different. Like for some people, it could be just their own personal financial goal, or maybe people want to, build, something large and something, building their own corporation. But yeah, it's solving problems, using inventions to do it, seeing the need and, using your own creativity to fill that need. And yeah, with that risk should come reward as well. So that's kind of how I see it as. But first comes the problem. And then also it's like, are you using kind of what you're passionate about to solve that problem? Right. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I think it's pronounced ikigai or ikiki diagram. That's, it's like this multi-Venn diagram that kind of intersects like what you're good at, what you're passionate about, what you love, and also what people will pay for. So through this process of like figuring out what you want to put out in the world, you kind of use that as a framework to think about, what is it that I want to solve using what talents that I have and interests that I have, because you wake up every day and everything is coming from you. Everything's coming out of you. So you got to figure out, how you're going to motivate yourself to bring that to life. And so when you're thinking about that kind of framework, that can help you out.
So the skills basically are you have to have the passion for it. You have to have a solution for a problem and then be willing to take that financial risk. Yeah. So you have to be very brave to be an entrepreneur, willing to take that risk. What are some of the challenges of being an entrepreneur? I mean, you talked about the financial aspect, but are there any other challenges?
Oh, there's plenty. There's plenty. And I remember before taking the leap and, you hear all these motivational speakers like the Tony Robbins of the world or, people of his ilk, and you're like, why are they just so like deep and emotional and what have you? Because some days that's all you have is that positive thinking, right? In order to kind of push you forward and think about, am I really on the right track? So there is uncertainty for sure that you have to face. Also loneliness, like when you choose, and surprisingly, when you choose to go out on your own, you kind of lose friends along the way or colleagues along the way. There's ones that you do keep that are really supportive, and there's ones that kind of can't really relate to you, even though you haven't really changed, but you've taken your kind of trajectory on a different path, and they might have a hard time relating to that. So there could be some loneliness as well. I think the biggest challenge is the risk, and I think that's one of the people's biggest fear is the risk. Like no one's going to pay me for what I want to do, or the money's not going to come. And that has happened. I have learned that lesson over the last 5 years, but from that, you learn from it. You learn from it. I learned about, having a routine, having like a system in place to where you're, generating activity around business development, around market. I had to learn marketing, even though I took an MBA. It gives you the frameworks and the strategies and, what a strategy should look like, but actually building your own business is something that's a little bit different. So there's lots of free resources out there. So the challenge is, like having the focus, it can be overwhelming, and also all the hats that you have to wear. And that's what I've learned over the last 5 years is really defining what those all are. And that's more than just delivering on a project. That there's actually several more roles that surround actually delivering a client project. And you're finding that you're spending a lot of time on all those other roles to do that, maybe 20% of that income generating stuff. So yeah, the challenges are many, But, we all have a capacity to learn. We're a very adaptable species. There's never been a better time, I think, just given the free resources available to, help you along. There's every community has some kind of entrepreneur hub, whether in a large city or a small city, there's entrepreneurial resources available for you. But it's a matter of finding your focus. Like all of it can be very overwhelming. And all of it does incorporate having to learn new habits and also learning new skills. So I can see how that could put people off, but I grew up in learning and development. So I'm all about learning. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's still very tiring. And you sometimes feel like you're not making any progress, but it's important to develop that system, define those roles for yourself, figure out what success looks like in all those roles. And then I had one director of sales in a hotel actually, share this wisdom is plan your work and then work your plan. And that's how she coached her sales team. And I think that's just a good kind of self-motivating, self-managing kind of motto to tell yourself. That's helped me along the way. So plenty of challenges. However,
Yeah.
I just want to say there's challenges in corporate life too, working in an organization, and there's stress, right? There's stress in anything, in any human endeavor. But the way that I've explained the stress that I feel is it's not being imposed on me. It's something that's kind of coming out of you. And I think the term is eustress, EUSTRESS. That's the
Yes.
stress. Yeah, you know that? Yeah.
Yes.
And it pulls you instead of it kind of pushing, it kind of pulls you along. Apparently it's the healthier stress. Maybe I'm wrong in that.
It's a healthy and necessary stress. Yes.
So plenty of challenges, but there must be a reward, right? Why do you keep doing this? And why do my friends ask me, Jeff, would you change what you do? I really wouldn't unless something catastrophic happened that, customers were not buying the services that I was putting out. Yeah, of course I would have to rethink my whole thing. But with all things being equal and everything as it is today, there's a reward. There's a reward with freedom and being able to, number one, figure out to do, doing what you love, thinking about the impact you want to make while you're on this planet, being able to do that every day, being able to choose the work. Sometimes you can't, but most of the time you can choose the exact work that you really want to do. And I think honestly, it's the freedom, even though you have to feed yourself, which is a whole other skill, kind of hunting versus gathering, it's still worth it to me anyway. And I've heard some people go back, it's not for them. It's just not for them. And I understand why, but for me, it just kind of makes sense still.
Yeah, it's very challenging because you have to be a project manager, you have to be a marketer, accountant, I guess, right? You have to balance the books.
Yeah.
So like you said, wearing a lot of hats, but then for those, you need to learn those skills. So yeah, I can see that it can be very challenging because you're learning those skills and you're actually getting away from your comfort zone. So it's hard. And then you mentioned the loneliness piece, which is something I never thought about. But is there some kind of a community for entrepreneurs to mitigate that loneliness?
Yeah. You have to create it for yourself. The organization, the corporation provides so much of our social community needs, right? And, I was lucky to grow up in a really robust, healthy environment, in that case, right? We were always a committee, there's volunteerism, there's friends, there's like-minded people around you. There's, people in the same profession as you, not even in your own location, but maybe across the country or around the world. So you have this community that you're naturally integrated with. You have to find that for yourself when you're an entrepreneur. So it can fall into kind of what you're putting out there, your profession. So where there's that diversity and inclusion community that's out there. For myself, I'm openly gay. So I'm part of Canada's LGBT Chamber of Commerce. So that's a great organization. And they have chambers of commerce for a lot of different, identities and different minorities. There's Black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, Indigenous chambers of commerce. So I found the gay one, and yeah, that provides some fraternity. And it does help, and they have programs as well as even, work opportunities within the chamber. So yeah, you do have to find it. It's not, you do have to do a lot of seeking out. It's not just there for you. It takes a lot of initiative to make those connections, build those relationships. But it's out there. It's out there. And we live in such a hyper connected world, right? Where you'll be able to find your groups for sure. I guess it's like, when you're first starting out, it's not having a team to rely on. It's you. I'm really fortunate to have a very supportive husband who's even, when we had, cash flow crisis, he still said, keep going, keep going. You know, it'll come. So, and it did. So I have a very supportive husband. I think it helps that he worked in a small consulting firm before early in his career. So he's seen what it's like when he knows it ebbs and flows. Family, I have colleagues, like, I have a best friend at work. She doesn't happen to work in my company, but she's on my phone. She works somewhere else, but we're chatting all the time, right? So we maintain that connection. She's interested in what I'm doing. I'm interested in what she's doing, and we're friends. So yeah, so you gotta seek it out, build it for yourself. It's not right in front of you when you go to work every day. So yeah.
That's good advice. So it's good that there's these different chambers of commerce available that people can join. And you also mentioned another resource, the Entrepreneur Hub. So I imagine that would be Invest Ottawa for Ottawa.
When I took advantage of that when I was in Toronto, and at the time it was called Enterprise Toronto. Now it's called something else. Oh, I don't think it's Invest Ottawa. I haven't used it here. I don't know, but they have like these entrepreneur hubs where it's like you can even talk to a small business advisor for free workshops, given by people who are experts in their field. There's just so much. The library, oh my gosh, the Toronto, sorry not to make this all Toronto centric, but I'm just, when I was in Toronto, this is when I was using it. And I think other major city libraries would have this. They have an entrepreneur in residence at the TPL, and they have offer programming where they have talks and workshops, and they provide a curriculum of how to start your own business. So it's all there. Also, their stuff, you can get access to their stuff on YouTube, and they have their downloads there as well. Yeah. So there's never been a better time. And I'm kind of disheartened because a recent statistic I show from StatsCan is that, business startups have actually been declining since the pandemic. So I thought everyone, work from home, work remotely, everyone, people doing side hustles, all these different things. I thought it'd be like this burgeoning thing, but apparently business starts are not going up. They're actually going down. So I don't have the exact number, but the trend I was really surprised to see. But I say to my friends, there's never been a better time, but it does take the willingness, getting over your fears. Fear of failure, I think, is the biggest one for most people, is like, what if it doesn't work?
Right.
Right. And I think that kind of ties into the work I'm trying to do in organization, is really, the equation that I follow is that, you manage diversity well, you make things equitable and fair, you focus on people feeling included and belonging at work. And with all kind of that recipe, that should equal innovation, right? You have people with different backgrounds working well together, they feel safe to fail. And I just think we're not taught naturally to do that, so yeah, it's something to overcome for sure.
I like that, feeling safe to fail. People don't normally feel safe, like not at work, not, I guess, as an entrepreneur. It's also hard. Yeah, that's a nice term. So let's say someone is on the fence. They don't know, they want to become an entrepreneur, but they're hesitant because of the risks. What advice would you give to them?
Well, see how you can mitigate that risk as much as you can. Like when I have these conversations with friends who are considering it, I use that kind of, not I guess deathbed kind of perspective. Like you're on your deathbed and you look back at your life and you're like, are you going to regret not even trying, or you'll be fine, or regret not doing it? And most people say, I really want to try. So it's like, okay, well, you want to do it sometime in this life, right? So that kind of helps you figure out, okay, well, I do want to do this. And yeah, there's risks, but you can get through it. So I think the biggest one's probably financial risk, people. So again, that was mitigated by my exit package, right? When I left Fairmont through that acquisition, and we're all given packages. So that helped kind of scoot me along, and taking advantage of all the resources, Enterprise Toronto, how to invoice, how to set up your business license, all these kinds of things. So there's resources there. So get savings in the bank. If you're partnered with someone, then have that conversation with them, and hopefully they're supportive that, if you can live off of one salary for an extended period of time or adjust your lifestyle in order to do that, then I'd say go for it. Even if you're not partnered, there's ways where you can, mitigate the risk financially too by, again, savings or figuring out on how you can reduce your living costs. So again, it just worked for me at the time, given the circumstances. It was something that was always on my mind. And I thought, well, this looks like, what do we call that? Time, like time to act kind of thing. I think there's like a Latin way to say it, but a fancy way to say it. But really, it's like, this is my time to act. So that might happen for you as well. And also, if you have this fear of failure or these kind of limiting beliefs, like, that's something worth examining. Like, you don't need a lot of expensive therapy for that. Therapy does help. I've had plenty in my life, so maybe that's helped me kind of, build self-awareness. But, I really feel like that we're born to create on this earth, on this planet. And we all have we're all here to create something, whether it's, a family, a product, a business, or a program, or at home, whatever it is. Like, we're here to create. So I think we're all born with that. You see little kids, they're creating all the time without fear. So I say, examine those limiting beliefs you have about yourself and see how you can overcome them. Right? We all have them about ourselves. So that takes some internal work. It's, it's not passive work. It is hard work, but it does take some internal work to kind of examine those and figure out a way to get over them. Yeah. So mitigate your risks. It may not happen this year, but if you think about it, something that you want to do, write it down. That's something that's worked for me. Writing it all down. I know it's like table stakes advice, and eventually it'll happen for you, whether it's the timing with work or a personal situation, whatever. It's different for everyone. But yeah, I think I answered part of that question anyway, Hedieh.
No, you did answer it. So, like, what people have to consider if they're not sure if entrepreneurship is for them. You did answer that. Thank you. Yeah. So if they can mitigate those risks, then go ahead. And I like that analogy of if you're on your deathbed and would you regret not having done it? So that's, I think, the best way to put it. So now let's say someone has just started out as an entrepreneur. What advice would you have for them? What should they do or not do?
Yeah. We talked about community, right? Getting some support in your life, whether it's that spouse or a friend or just, getting someone that you can kind of, who'll be there for you, right? So make sure you have that person in your life. I think it would be a huge help. Taking advantage of the free resources. And again, I mentioned them a few times. There are plenty of free resources. And as you go, you won't get it perfect. I know that's a kind of a big thing, at least in my community, the LGBT community. Like, I think that happens for women as well. A lot of minorities, newcomers feel even that if I don't check all the boxes, like, it's not going to be the right time. It's never going to be really the right perfect time to start. And you're not going to show up perfectly for that first client or that first podcast or whatever it is. Just kind of get over that, it doesn't have to be perfect, and that you'll learn as you go. Like, some people feel they need to make sure everything's all set up perfectly. All the little pieces are in a row on the table, and then you can go do it. You kind of build things as you go. Like, you build things as you need them. You figure things out as you need them. So just get started. And it just takes that first client, to really be able to speak to you, for you to deliver, for you to deliver something of value to them, for them to recommend you, and then it can move on to your next client. And then you just start kind of taking advantage of those referral opportunities, or maybe there's even contract opportunities that you find that can help also kind of help you with some stable income as you're building your practice. So yeah, finding that support, not worrying about being perfect, not worrying that you have to learn everything before you even start, because the real learning is as you go. And I'm sure there's so much more. Like, it's honestly, I'm sure there's a more positive term of that term, death by 1,000 cuts. There's like I hope there's a positive term, but there's like 1,000 different little things that you don't even are aware that you need to do, but you end up doing them because, whether it's like administration or, incorporating or filing these taxes and, interacting with CRA more often than you thought you needed to. Like, so many things, but it's worth it.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned, like, it's a matter of consistency versus perfection.
Yeah.
Because you're right, a lot of people feel like they have to have all their ducks in a row before they proceed, but it's not the case. And you mentioned even the podcast, and you're right. Like I didn't know, how to do a podcast. I just started Googling and started reading, and I learn as I go. So hopefully, like, each one will be better than the previous one. But you're right. Some people feel like everything should be there before they can actually proceed and do something, and it has to be perfect.
Yeah. No, we have to get over that. Oh, and also I think the other key thing is one thing that I learned and that kind of resulted in a cash flow crisis is setting up like your week and your month, like bucketing, what you're focusing on Tuesdays on, Wednesdays on, Thursdays on. That really helps, it kind of creates a job for yourself that day too. So I think creating like a system for yourself, and there's so many resources out there for, solopreneurs or freelancers, even like freelancing resources, help you with figuring out how you can just organize your week and your month. So you're not only taking care of your clients, you're taking care of your business. And, even if you feel you don't have anything to do that day, say if you're focusing on like administration stuff, there's always something that you need to do to think about, whether it's, filing papers or, applying for that credit line or getting that business account. There's always something that will help you just kind of another pebble for the jar to keep your business going. And there's lots of pebbles. But make sure and to use, I grew up in L&D. So I grew up on Franklin Covey, like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I think it's really helped set me up. I don't know why I left that close to the end to share. Like that really helped set me up for figuring out like my purpose in this and organizing myself and interacting with others. So just getting a system of like bucket, give yourself a job every day, but make it a routine. And thought bubbles gone. Thought bubble. Self-management. Yeah, just getting that system down of your activity. So, you don't get kind of heads down on a client project without thinking I need to like start emailing or messaging people on LinkedIn or working on your next project. On getting your next project, because that was a lesson I had to learn because I had it incorporated that into my weekly or monthly routines. Yeah, so setting up a system for yourself, and it just ends up becoming
Sort of like sort of like having looking at it as a project and having those tasks in your calendar to make sure you're actually doing everything when you need to do them. Yeah, that's very interesting and challenging at the same time.
yeah.
Yeah. So any last words before we wrap up? Any advice?
If you've been thinking about it, like do it. Like again, I think I said this 5 times. There's never been a better time, especially if you're in like a services kind of role. Your customers can be anywhere around the world, given what you, in terms of how connected we are, the free resources available. It helps kind of puts some more control in like in your court on, being able to sustain yourself. I know people are, there's so much happening right now, right? The volatility and the political and economic situations. This helps kind of give you a little bit more power, and it kind of helps you even self-actualize more if you're at a certain age and stage in your life. So I say if you've been thinking about it for a while, I just want to encourage you to take that leap. If this is something that you've never considered before, start thinking about it. I think, as industry changes and the way we work has changed, I think this might be the new normal given the implications. I'm sure we've heard AI way too many times, how that's changing everything. But if you're having governments talking about what they're going to do with their citizens, because there's going to be no traditional jobs anymore, well, this is a great time for you to think about, well, what can I do to improve my situation or more useful, or, maybe we're all going to be contractors at some point. Like, I don't know. I can't see the future, but the trends are there. And apparently this is like the next big industrial revolution. So why not start thinking about it if you haven't yet? So I don't know if that's an ominous, an ominous tone for wrapping up our podcast, but it excites me. I grew up on, shows like Star Trek where the future is amazing and, we don't have any want anymore. And, technology's, given us a lot of positive things. And I still have that optimistic mindset. Like the best is yet to come. So yeah, so why not try to position yourself to take advantage of all that, right? If you missed the last .com boom in the like early 2000s, this is like the next kind of boom that's happening.
So ending it on a positive note. Yeah. So taking advantage of this world of AI now to set yourself up for success. That's great advice. And before we end, I have one last question. How can viewers connect with you if they want to access your services?
Yeah. linkedin.com/Jeff-Saint-Denis, Jeff-St-Denis. You can find me on LinkedIn. Culturecatalyst.ca is my website. And my email is Jeff, Jeff, at culturecatalyst.ca. So please reach out if something has sparked your interest or you want more information on, or you just want to connect. I'm happy to do it. Not only do I love talking about more inclusive workplaces, I love talking about entrepreneurship and helping people who maybe are thinking about going on their own. So I'm happy to connect with you on that score as well.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jeff. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Hedieh, for inviting me. This has been awesome.
Until next time, goodbye.